Welcome back, first graders. Today we are going to read another fable. It's called The Dog in the Manger. But before we get started, I wanted to talk to you about how we are going to be splitting it into 2 days. And at the end of the 2 days, we're going to be able to review the characteristics of fables, including characters, plot, setting, and moral. We're going to be able to identify and explain the moral of a fable. We'll be able to define and use the word budge. And we're going to be able to identify and draw an example of personification in a fable. Our key vocabulary for this lesson is budge, oxen, and plow. The word budge is a verb, and remember that verbs are our action words. Budge means to move. So an example of it is I pushed and pushed, but was not able to budge the refrigerator. And if you look at this picture of the people with the rock, they're pushing and pushing, but it's not going to matter how hard they push because that rock is not going to budge or move. Our next word is oxen, and oxen is a noun. Remember that nouns are people, places, animals, or things, okay? Oxen are animals similar to bulls, and they are used for carrying or pulling things, okay? So they kind of look like big cows, but they're not. They're ox. But when you have two, you call them oxen, or if you have more than one, you call them oxen. So an example of using the word could be 2 oxen pulled the farmer's cart across town. Can you say the word oxen for me, please? Oxen. Can you say it in a whisper voice? Oxen. Can you say it in a slow motion voice? Oxen. Okay. And then our last vocabulary word for this lesson is plow. And plow is a noun. And a plow is a farm tool that's used to turn the soil to prepare the ground for planting. You guys might have heard this word before in your farming unit last year. A way of using plow in a sentence could be the farmer used the plow to prepare the soil for planting the corn seeds. And that's a picture of a plow right there. So before we get started, let's review what you remember from the 3 fables that you've already heard. So I want you to look at this picture down here, and I want you to think about what fable was this? Do you remember what fable this was? Yeah, it was The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Remember, he was lonely, so he was running down the hill going, "Wolf! Wolf!" Even though there wasn't a wolf. Do you remember me reading that? And then the next one was The Maid in the Milk Pail, and she was thinking about how pretty she was going to look in that dress, and she had that milk pail balanced on her head, and she was going to sell that milk for a pretty dress, and she's thinking about it, and she's like, and I don't even care. But when she was going, her milk pail fell off of her head, and she lost all the milk, and she wasn't able to sell it for her beautiful dress, right? And then the last one that we read over here, but I think that my face is in the way, but I think you can probably still see it, is The Goose and the Farmer from The Goose and the Golden Egg. And remember, the farmer, he went out and he saw a golden egg, and he realized how valuable it was, or how much money it was worth, and he was selling them, and he got impatient and greedy, and he wanted to chop the goose open to get all of the golden eggs, and the goose ran away, right? So he didn't end up getting what he wanted either. So I want you to point to the shepherd boy. Where is the shepherd boy? The shepherd boy is right here, okay? Now I want you to point to the character who was balancing something on her head and wanted to sell milk at the market to buy a dress. Which character am I talking about? That's right, I'm talking about the milkmaid. Her name was Peggy. And then what about the character that was greedy? Remember, greedy means to want more than you actually need. That was the farmer, right? The farmer. So, what were some of the lessons? Well, we're going to talk about each of the lessons that these characters learned. So, what did the shepherd boy learn? What was the lesson or moral of that story? It was to tell the truth, because if you often lie, then people won't actually believe you when you are telling the truth. What about who learned the lesson? Oh, this was a funny sounding lesson. Who learned the lesson, don't count your chickens before they're hatched? Which just means don't expect everything to go the way that you planned. Do you remember who learned that one? It was Peggy, the milkmaid. And what about the person who learned that if you're greedy, you might lose what you already have? Who learned that one? The farmer. All right. So before we get started today, I want to give you a little bit of background information on some of the stuff we're talking about today. So we're going to hear another fable, and I want you to fill in the blank. Fables are short fiction stories that teach a moral or a lesson, okay? So this fable is also short and it has a moral, but in today's fable, there are no people. So this is the first fable that we're reading that doesn't have a single person in it. It's only animals, okay? So all of the characters are animals, and the animals can talk. Hang on. The animals can talk? Let me ask you a question. Can animals really talk in real life? No, they can't talk. We can pretend they can talk, but not in real life. They can't really talk. So this is another characteristic of fables. So like the whole talking, animals talking, that's a characteristic of fables. And that characteristic is when animals act like people, okay? And when animals act like people in a story, that's called personification. Can you say that word for me? It's kind of a long one and it's kind of tricky to say. Ready? We're going to say it together. Personification. Personification. Okay? And that word just means that animals are acting like people. Now, I want you to look at this picture. What do you see in that picture? What do you see? I see a dog, and I see an ox. Remember, I only see one, so it's only an ox. It's not oxen unless there are more than one. I see some hay. And what is this? What is this thing right here? Does anybody know what that is? It's a manger. Okay, so the dog is standing in a manger. And a manger is a long, narrow, narrow means skinny, open container that holds food for animals. A manger sits on legs off of the ground, making it easy for the animals to reach when they're hungry. So instead of the ox having to reach his neck all the way down to the ground, he just has to get it to that manger. So it just makes it easier for them. Because they can't pick their food up with their hands and put it in their mouth, can they? Mm-mm. So the large animal that is standing in front of the manger is an ox, but we kind of already talked about that, right? And it looks similar to another animal that we've seen in our stories, right? It looks like a cow. Excuse me, I am tired. And remember that when we have more than one ox, we call them oxen. So one ox, many oxen. Can you say that for me? One ox, many oxen. So I want you to listen carefully and I want you to find out what the moral of the story is. But we also need to make sure that we are listening for those vocabulary words, remember? So let me see get your hands ready. I want you to stick your ears on, make sure they're working. Mine are working. And you are going to listen very, very, very carefully for these 3 words. And when you hear one of these words, you're going to raise your hand, okay? So we've got the word budge, we've got the word oxen, and we've got the word plow. And if you hear one of those words, you better raise your hand so that I know you're paying attention. Here we go. There once was a dog who liked to nap on hot days in the cool barn. He liked to sleep in the manger, a long wooden box where hay was put for the farm animals to eat. Why do you think that the dog likes to nap in the barn? Listen to the first sentence again. Ready? There once was a dog who liked to nap on hot days in the cool barn. So the dog wants to sleep in there because it's cooler in the barn than it is outside. One hot day, after a long afternoon pulling the plow, which is a tool that is used to turn the soil, the oxen returned to the barn, hungry for their dinner. But they couldn't get to their food because the dog was lying in the manger taking a nap on the hay. "Excuse me," said one of the tired oxen. "Would you please move so that I can eat my hay?" The dog, angry at being awakened from his nap, growled and barked at the ox. Hang on. Do you think that the dog has a good reason to be angry at the ox? I can see why he'd be angry for being woken up, but at the same time, he shouldn't really be angry because he's sleeping on the oxen's food, right? And the ox asked nicely, right? He said please, and he said excuse me. Let's see what happens next. "Please," said the tired, hungry ox. "I've had a hard day, and I'm very hungry." But the dog, who did not even eat hay, but only enjoyed it for its comfort, barked and snapped in response, and refused to budge or move. At last, the poor oxen had to give up and went away, tired and hungry. The moral of this story is that you should be nice and share, especially when someone else needs something more than you do. So the dog should have shared, right? The dog should have moved over or found somewhere else to sleep in the barn because the ox was really tired and needed some food because you need food to have energy, right? So I want you to say the moral of the story for me. Ready? We're going to say it together. You should be nice and share, especially when someone else needs something more than you do. Okay? And that's something that you would want somebody to be nice to you, right? You remember us reading the Do Unto Others book? And we talked about how we want to treat people nicely. We want to treat people the way that we would like them to treat us, right? Because if we treat them well, then they're going to want to treat us well. All right, guys. So that is it for today's story. I would like for you to try and remember the story, maybe tell somebody at home the story. And we're going to talk about it more tomorrow, okay? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.